Welcome to the podcast School of Love, where we want to revolutionize the parent child relationship so we can talk about anything, especially sex. And today I get to talk with Andrew Love, and we get to talk about sexualization versus talking about sex. And in this conversation, Andrew Love talks about his own family culture that he has been building, where sexuality is an open topic that they can talk about anywhere. And it's a wonderful example to learn from. I took a lot of tips for myself. And we also talk about what our parents' fears in talking about sexuality and how can we face those fears and what are the benefits of having those conversations. And yeah, amazing opportunity that we have as parents to give our kids a really strong foundation of just feeling loved. And so, yeah, I hope you enjoy this episode. Hi, Andrew. Welcome to the School of Love podcast.
Hi. Hello.
Nice to have you.
Yes.
So I thought most people know who you are, but there might be still 5 people who don't. And just in case they're listening, I just want to say Andrew is in charge of High Noon, a program assisting people to find out what kind of life they want to live and live it, especially in the aspect of sexuality. If you want to, I don't know if I said that.
Fair assessment. I can acquiesce to that.
Okay.
It's a good one.
Nice. And so, Andrew, you have your own podcast, Love, Life, and Legacy. And I have to say, that's like the reason why I even downloaded a podcast app on my phone, because I started listening to your podcast. Which is really great because of what High Noon does. You always start the intro with navigating these hyper-sexualized times. And that's why I thought it'd be awesome if I can talk with you today about sexualizing versus talking about sex.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Let's go. I'm excited. I mean, this is my lane, right? When you do something for long enough, it just becomes second nature. I was just thinking about my house where I grew up in. My mom still lives there. And I remember at some point, I looked at this painting on this wall in our basement. And I was like, how long has this painting been here? And they were like, since you were born. I was like, I've never seen this painting before. It's just been there. And it wasn't a nice painting. Anyway, it was just like a piece of art. And it was always there, but I just never observed it, and definitely not with any great detail. And that's unfortunately what I realized. That's most people's experience with their own selves and their own, like the nuance of their own life, especially in sex. It's just like this reactive experience. And since I got to work with High Noon, it's just been a joy because now I can see life in a much more slowed down way, where I can see when I'm getting off the train tracks of the life that I want and starting to go on to like towards my own demise. I can see this process. I can, on some level, even when I'm like fully emoted and I'm fully engaged in some like anger or whatever, I'm still consciously aware of like, I'm angry and I'm slowly making my wife angry and everybody else around me angry. And I still don't always choose right. I'm not batting 100%, but it's just really cool because it allows you to like be conscious of every aspect of your life and slow things down so you can actually appreciate it and customize it. Right. So I've already gone off. You can see like I just talk. So you're going to have to give me some guardrails here.
Yeah. So yeah, I just wanted to also ask, like those times when you're angry and stuff, do you ever just read your last name and calm down?
No, my last name is weird because for, I don't know, a decade, my last name was all over girls' butts, you know? It's like a phenomenon that people kind of saw in passing. Oh, yeah, the word love on somebody's butt. But for me, it was like, what is happening? It's so weird. People are sitting on my heritage. It's really is a weird thing. So
you didn't change your name to be Love.
Love through and through. I've looked at the origin story of love, and it's either glamorous or no, either way, it's kind of weird. So one is it came from the word louffre, which is wolf in French. And so it has some ties to that. Or it has something to do with the British just renaming all the Scottish and like the subservient neighbors that they have and be like, I don't like your name. You're going to be. And so, it wasn't because my people were the saints of the patron saints of love. I wish. Make my life a lot easier.
But it's still a nice name because I think, like, I believe whenever you read a word, it does give you something, and love is a positive word. And I was even thinking, yeah, like if it's your last name, you see it so often. Like I would want my last name then to be peace on earth or something. And then people read it all the time, and then it gets them thinking about it.
I mean, there are legal means for you to change your name to Amelia Peace on Earth if you want. Yeah, no, it's for the most part just a cool last name. It's, and everybody always stops and says, wow, nice last name and good conversation starter. But more importantly, it was like, if you have last name royalty, and I believe that I do, I'm not rich in many ways, but in last names, I'm very rich. And so then I really took the responsibility of giving my kids really good first names that mean something. Cause I was like, my parents were given Love as a last name and they gave me Andrew as a first name. That's like, it's like I had a friend who was a baseball player and he was this natural whiz at baseball and he got all these scholarships, but he's also just really into drinking and smoking and he kind of wasted his talent, let's just say. And I feel like that happened to my first name too. So I did not repeat that mistake with my kids. Let's just say that. They all have really cool names.
All right.
Yeah.
So then there's the word sexualizing. I thought we could go into that definition. What does it mean to you? Because also you say in your intro, it's not just sexualized times we're living in, it's hyper sexualized, which I really agree with.
Yeah.
What do you think sexualizing something even means?
Yeah, to make it sexual, to make things that are not sexual is to sexualize. And like kids are not meant to be sexualized whatsoever. And there is, I did a lot of research early on, especially in the beginning of High Noon. And there's this weird merging of two forces that are equally bad and they were about to converge. One was kind of this TikTok generation asks young people to look older than they are. And I mean, this is going to date me and it's going to turn me into that guy. It was like back in my day, but it's very true. Kids' clothes back when I was a kid were for kids. They were distinctly kiddish. And now kids' clothes emulate, in many cases, adult clothing, but in smaller fashion. This is a part of a cultural shift. Kids' clothes were always bordering on just wearing loosey-goosey fabric that could barely be fashioned into something you would call clothing. But now it's like straight up fashion. They have, skinny jeans and they have all this stuff, right? And so you have like this kind of phenomena where younger kids are acting older when they're young. A lot of this is social media and whatever, and it's just a part of the era that we live in, okay? The other thing is that when you look at the data about pornography, there's always an emphasis on young people. So teens is a search term that's used a lot, and it's the sexualization of younger and younger people. So here are these two merging forces. One, younger people acting older than they are. The other end of this is sexualization of children, both coming from very disturbing places. And so it's really the sexualization of young people. And that is that young people, before you're ready to handle the repercussions of sex, it shouldn't be on your radar. And the society should protect you from dealing with sex has baggage associated with it. The obvious being STDs and pregnancy, with dealing with life, but also just emotionally, like little kids are very limited in their emotional capabilities, right? Last night, I was playing soccer I'm in Mongolia, and there's just in most places, there's not a lot of parents. It's just, I was in a park. I took a video of it because I was like, nobody will believe this exists. It was a massive park with hundreds of kids, and I was the only parent within like miles of, like, I was just like, oh my God, in America, this does not exist. There's so many helicopter parents are like, Billy, don't fall. Out there, there's just like, it's full on Lord of the Flies, like a kid's society, right? So last night I was playing with a bunch of kids. I was just playing with my kids and their cousins. But when there's an adult that's like engaged with kids, all these other kids come out of the woodwork because they're like hungry for some sort of adult attention. So I had all these kids, can we play with you? Yeah, sure. And at some point it got a little intense, and one of my relatives called another kid fat, and that kid really looked hurt. And I was like, whoa, okay, so let's stop, guys. Let's work this out. And then I talked to my relative, who's this little kid who said it. And I was like, what are you doing? Like, why are you calling this kid fat? Like, he's a good kid, and you're a good kid. And he just started to emotionally shut down, and he stopped communicating. He stopped looking at me. And there's a lot of reasons why this was happening, but I could really see this is what a kid does when he cannot handle emotions. He just freezes in place. And some people, their reaction is different, but for him, it was just absolute, I cannot handle life right now. I can't even look at you. I'm just going to play with my hands. It's my safe place, right? So we dealt with it. We worked on it. We talked more, and it's fine ultimately. But when you're talking about little kids like that being exposed to porn, they're being exposed to this world that doesn't make sense to them, and there's no way that it could emotionally. And this is true if you look at brain science. Especially boys are not fully developed neurologically until deep into their so they cannot make good decisions until they're 20, like 25, 26. They say different, like between 24 and 27 is like the average number that they say. So that's why if you look at, why is auto insurance always way more for young men? It's because they don't even have access to reason. They're just like, yo, how fast can I go? That's what they're thinking, right? I was a skateboarder. All my friends were skateboarding, snowboarding. We never asked, should we do this? We were always like, yo, let's try this. And it was never like, are we going to die? It's like, I can't wait to risk my life. I'm not even thinking this. It's like, I'm going to jump off this thing. Let's see what happens, right? And then you put sex on top of that. It's a disaster. But because society through movies and all this, there's so much pressure to engage in sexuality, what you're doing is you're sexualizing things that before their time, and it creates massive amounts of emotional pain and confusion and societal breakdown. That sounded really dramatic, but really a lot of problems. And so to go back to your original question of what is sexualization, it's making stuff sexual outside of the context. And in summary to this soliloquy, what we've kind of decided to really brand, the way to describe sex is that everything deep should have a purpose. So what's the purpose of sex? It should be intimacy, to bring you closer to another actual person and to God. And when that's complete, it's like this holy trinity through sex that's completed through the act of sex. You're becoming one in essence with another person. Chanoguk, the definition of chanoguk is to become one, but also you becoming one with God in a very meaningful way. Anything outside of that, sex often takes you away from people. That's porn. Takes you away from God, and takes you away from the person that you want to be. And so when you sexualize things that are outside of creating more intimacy, then it's problematic for sure. So yeah, I know that was a really long answer, but yeah, to make things sexual is sexualization. And we see that making kids sexual, in this day and age, animals sexual, making robots sexual. Like we have AI and all, it's bananas. And it all falls outside of serving the purpose of sex, the real design purpose of sex, which is to create intimacy and a sense of belonging and meaning and value.
100%. Yeah. Yeah, I love your definitions of also what the purpose of sex, and yeah, really good explanation of children and how they're just incapable of yeah, that's what they're learning, is going through emotions. And that's why we're here, right, as parents, is to help them
Mm.
go through that. Um, and I feel like that's also what we often just haven't learned, like how to deal with anger. Like, but still, I'm still learning as an adult. Um, and
Yeah.
so, yeah, I think we've kind of, I don't know if we've unlearned or forgotten how to do this as parents, is just getting our kids through their emotions.
I think it's pretty new for humanity. We haven't had all of our kind of ducks in a line the way that we do now, because now we have psychology. I think is in a good place. There's like, the good and bad side of psychology. Spirituality and religion is in a good place in that not everything is good about it, but you can extract really good stuff, good elements from all these things and combine them to create a super suite of tools that allow you to have a really deep and rich relationship with the topic of sex in a way that we couldn't before. We just couldn't, because honestly, true parents helped us to understand sex in a way that was never discussed before. The Western world had a really dysfunctional relationship with sex through Christianity. It was really because the understanding of Jesus was just like, he didn't have sex, so therefore, if you want to become holy, just stop having sex, right? That's if you're a monk or a nun or whatever, the more holy you are, it's like the less sex you're having. And then in the East, there was an understanding of sexuality through through the yogic traditions of, what's it, tantric tradition of sexuality. But it was never like with a personalization of a God that is your parent, that loves you, that wants to be a part of this act. It was more like the ethereal kind of cosmic God of like impersonal, right? But now the true parents brought those elements together of making sex a holy act, but together with a personalized heavenly parent. And those things are ethereal and big, but if you think of it as a parent yourself, of like, wouldn't you want your child to be in a relationship that celebrates love throughout their blessing, throughout their life, as they get older, and they're so passionate about each other that they can't stop but to make love and to have sex as a part of their relationship deep into their 60s and 70s and 80s. That to me is the untold story of humanity, because we haven't had a model for it, which is why you don't see movies where there's an 85-year-old couple making out on a park bench. I've been looking for that have been a couple for 50, 60 years, right? That have withstood the test of time, and they're still choosing each other every single day. That's the ultimate romantic story that we haven't seen, but is actually fully in front of us. We have that option to consider this, but because of wars, because of where humanity was at, we have no evidence that we were anything other than just a traumatized people over and over and over again. It doesn't mean that trauma isn't happening right here and now, but the overwhelming majority of humanity is in a place where we can break through past our trauma and experience chanuguk in real time, right? Because there's even tools to how to deal with trauma and all this stuff. And I believe we're in this golden era of healing, and sex is a huge part of that we can restore sex for the first time in humanity, because regardless of how much an individual understood it, they didn't set those conditions that true parents did to open the gate for the rest of us to then pass through. And the only reason I'm able to like stand here today is not because I did anything special. I just followed in the tradition of our faith, right? And it wasn't easy, and it's still not easy, but because even the people who started it, like true parents, but then all the parents and all the people who like fought like crazy to just not, follow the inclinations of their bodies or even of their lineage that's fighting inside of their DNA. And they have a tradition of infidelity or whatever, and they overcame and gave themselves to their spouse again and again and again. Those people made it easier for our generation. And the more that we fight, it's a subsequent, gift that we can give, our inheritance to the next generation. So I don't believe, in my personal perspective, from all that I've read and understood about history, that there's ever been an era like this when humanity was given the gift of recreating itself in the likeness of God and including sex into that mix. And I attribute that to true parents, to be honest, and all the other many people that got us to this point. But true parents finally it's like if you can imagine all these people building this pyramid and then true parents on the top. And they finally opened the door and unlocked it and pushed the door, raced through, and then said, everybody come with us. And there's a bunch of people who are filing through now, you know? And we want to create that heavenly culture, but we got to live it first.
That's right. Would you say The Notebook is a good, isn't there an old couple in that? I'm not a romantic comedy specialist, but
I think that's one of the closest things, except, you know, what Hollywood likes to do is in kids' movies, they kill parents always. I was just talking to my kids about, hey, you know, Frozen, you know, all this movie, like, why do their parents always die? Don't you think it's a little weird? But then in a lot of those kind of dramatic movies, there has to, so in The Notebook, it was like one person had Alzheimer's or whatever. Like, it's never just a happy ending where you show the struggle. You show all the fights. You show the couple going bankrupt, or they have an insolvent financial situation. They get through it. And not only do they get through it, but they love each other all the more because of their trials and tribulations, right? We know these couples, they exist, but we never highlight them. We highlight the super attractive young couples. And Hollywood basically says you're useful when you're young and attractive, and when you're old, you sleep in separate beds and you stop having sex. That's what I gathered growing up in this world, is like, I guess you just stop having sex when you're old because you become really, I don't know, boring or useless. It's a really weird concept, but that's what's been projected upon us. But the Wolfenbergers, to be honest, were my first example of like, wow, they have a very animated and active sex life in their, and Mitsue's, they're both in their 70s now, I believe. And that's like, you know, life goals.
yeah, that's
Yeah.
wonderful. But yeah, kind of rewinding, because
Mm-hmm.
like we see sexuality today.
Mm-hmm.
And I was just kind of looking online, when did it even start? And so there was, yeah, I don't know if you would even really define it as sexualization, because, yeah, the ancient times, they made little statues, you know, like I think there's like a little one of a really round woman. And the point is, though, to emphasize fertility.
Sure.
Yeah, it is also to do with sexuality, but
Mm-hmm.
yeah, if it's really sexualizing, I don't know. And I mean, compared to this day and age, it's really, I see it as a very different thing. But then there are also like the statues that were built, like Michelangelo or something, of naked bodies. So like this,
Sure.
uh,
Sure.
yeah, human anatomy, like I think you can appreciate the beauty of it,
Mm-hmm.
but then yeah, what's the difference of appreciating that beauty but then sexualizing?
Yeah. Well, you know, there are statues much closer to home. In Champyong, there's a giant penis statue, and then there's a vagina statue right in front and center. Those, we don't know where those went, but those were in Champyong for many years. And I was shocked when I found out what they were, because they were pretty abstract. It wasn't really clear.
Yeah.
But when you realize that anybody might be offended or shocked, that's their own dysfunction, actually. And True Father has some very good, and you can see them in the Core of the Universe, the book, but they were like, you know, your negative attitude towards sex isn't about sex. It's about you and your dysfunction that you got to work through, right? So obviously, here's a big difference, right? Is like celebrating the naked human body is celebrating an act of triumph. As far as I can tell, and everything that I've ever heard, there is nothing as complex as the human body in terms of the trillions of cells working together to create several systems that allow us to function. It's unbelievably complex and nothing that could ever be recreated. So in order to understand it, why not celebrate it? And why not see it in an appropriate way? And like in our family, one way we do that is like if the drapes are closed, like I was walking around pre-shower naked and nobody was batting an eye, right? My wife does that too. We just like our nakedness. That's like, hey, guess what? There's something under our clothes. We have naked bodies too, just like you, right? It's just kind of normalized and there's nothing sexual about it. It's just we have human bodies, right? And I think a healthy person can see a naked statue and see it as what it is. It's a human body. But when we make it mean something, that's a part of our, like a deeper longing to be connected to something out of like a yearning that comes from some dysfunction. right? And that's what like porn is and that kind of stuff is. It's not about sex. It's about like a need for belonging and a need for wanting something to do with sex, right? And it's not coming from a stable place. And there was a debate in the past about in our own movement about, oh, women should dress more conservatively, and or yeah, like what is too short in terms of a short skirt. And that honestly is a great conversation to have, healthy in a healthy way. It could be a loaded conversation, but the idea isn't to control people one or the other, but to understand that in our present culture, since we are so sexualized from such a young age, we're watching movies where people use each other for the sake of sex, and it is ingrained into our subconscious that when we're easily triggered. I deal with people who function, in society, they're students, they're workers, whatever, and they're easily triggered because they just have years and years of training and viewing people in a certain sexual way. And it's really hard to untangle that. But a healthy person who has really worked on themselves and has a healthy relationship with sex would be much more likely to see a statue or a painting and just see it as art and not be affected in a sexually triggered way. Just as somebody who's not an alcoholic who has a healthy relationship with alcohol would see grapes and be like, yeah, those are just grapes. But somebody might like, oh, grapes, that could be wine. And then they just start to like, pornify grapes. And it's like, chill, they're just grapes, It's the makings of something else. So, but again, it's something easier said than done because we are all implicated due to the culture that we grew up in. It's a highly sexualized culture, and none of us are free of this because nobody lives out of eyeshot of seeing a bus that has a Dolce and Gabbana ad of some, it's allegedly like my wife is showing me, oh, I love this fashion magazine. On the back was some Versace or whatever, and it was basically a couple about to have sex, and it was like a fragrance. I was like, geez, Louise, that has nothing to do with perfume as far as I can tell, but like this stuff is everywhere. It's everywhere. And so that gets into you because even if you're blessed, you're like, oh, my wife, and like, oh, you start going into this sexualized place. So it's not, when I say stuff like the original thing about being detached from, say, an art piece, that's in the ideal. And we have quite a ways to get there because a lot of people actually can't even handle that. They can't. They have to have stupid phones because anything just on Instagram can trigger them to go to porn. And like, it's really, everything's so like a couple degrees of separation between them just losing their minds because sex is that powerful because it's connected to our expression of love, our understanding of love.
Yeah. Yeah, because I was thinking like more from the perspective of those people who were making those statues and the people living at that time. For them, maybe that was sexualization for them, but it seems more of a healthy sexualization if it was at all.
Sure.
But yeah, like you said, today you make anything sexual, and that's why I really feel like you said, like you say every time in your podcast, it's hyper sexualized times because people use it in every third commercial, right? Just to sell a drink or a vitamin or
Yeah. Hamburgers. Don't you remember? What was it? There's that one burger chain that used Paris Hilton, and she was like being sprayed with water on a car. And it was like, now they've done enough meta studies to show very clearly how mainstream ads on magazines or whatever, and in that case, a video commercial, are directly copying imagery from porn. Just with clothing and substitute, the male anatomy with a hamburger. Now you have that whatever burger chain had Paris Hilton, whatever. And so again, you're sexualizing a hamburger, right? It's like, for God's sakes, like at what point is it too far? I think we're experimenting with that question. How far is too far? We're beyond too far. We're like, we're falling off the cliff and we're still asking the question, have we gone far enough yet?
And is it just to sell, like just to make money? I mean, I understand the desire side, right? Like the people that fall for those commercials, right? Like you said, yeah, people just want to be a part of something They have this need for connection. And that's why I understand the people who fall for the temptation. But for the people who are making the temptation and the sexualized stuff, yeah, it's just to sell, right? It's just all
Sure.
selfish motives, right? Or is there anything else that drives this whole sexualized movement in the world?
I mean, it gets people's attention. So we're in this era when people are just vying for attention. And they call it the attention economy. So obviously, anything sexual will grab. Men are just hyper visual creatures. Like whether you want to see something or not, you see it in the corner of your eye. Like I can definitely see the shape of what a person looks like out of the corner of my eye. And then it's up to me. Can I not look at that or not, right? But like we're super visual. So imagine you're just scrolling, and then what are the things that are going to stop you from scrolling and catch your attention? It's, sex is a very safe bet, right? But it's also, I mean, according to our faith, and I love this because I know a lot of people, myself included, it's really hard to relate to the origin story according to Christianity of Adam and Eve, because I have just so many questions. I wasn't born in a religious home. So it's like, wait, are they hairy? Are they wearing clothes? Like, there's too many questions, and nobody knows. And like, even the name Adam doesn't seem very caveman-y or whatever they were, whatever creatures they were. But you know it to be true because it's true in your bones when you hear these stories, right? Like how much our separation from God is deeply entwined with sex. Like it's undeniable that this thing that is clearly designed to, true parents talk about love, life, and legacy, lineage. They say we change lineage in our podcast, but love, life, and lineage. So like that it's connected to the most vulnerable that you'll ever be in front of somebody, because it's not just about your physical body. It's about mentally and emotionally opening up to somebody and doing that by way of being naked and unashamed in front of them, right? There's so much, but then it also, you can create life, and also your DNA, all future generations are a part of this act. So to say that it's important is such an understatement. And then to see how we've manipulated it into something so trivial, just like, just use this thing to sell a hamburger. For God's sakes, like it's a universe apart from its original intention. And so it's a little bit disturbing, but it's so beautiful and so valuable when you can start to relate with it in that way. But the hard part is going from our society's view and what we're used to hearing and thinking, and moving into a place where we actually view it as a sacred act. And not in a weird way where now we, like, some people view sacred things as it must not be touched and it must be tucked away in this pristine box, but rather that it's just thought of in a very healthy way, and that we see the value of it and we participate in uplifting it, right? And when we fall short, that we work on it. I honestly forgot what your original question was. I feel like I was climbing a tree and I went on many branches, and then I just climbed on an entirely different tree.
That's okay.
Sorry about that.
No problem. Yeah. I mean, it's kind of another question, but is sexualizing always evil? Would you say?
Well, Uncle Dave, I remember in the early days of High Noon, we were being asked, well, what is porn, right? Because we even have a lot of surveys within our movement that we give in our talks about how many people struggle with porn addiction. And the number is pretty shocking, right? But then we had to define, well, what is porn? And so we defined it in our survey, but Uncle Dave's definition has always been something that sexually arouses me. That's not my. So that's a really high standard. And that's the standard of Jesus, right? I mean, Jesus said that you're committing adultery if you even think about it outside of, the context of marriage, right? So it's an extremely high standard to achieve. But so I would say that that's true too. Like if you do sexualize things outside of your spouse, you are creating more trouble for yourself, at least. If not, slowly walking away from the person that you want to be and from the marriage that you want. And it creates all sort of strange emotions. It occupies your thoughts in ways that are not productive. And just spiritually, it does not feel right. When you do come back to your spouse, it doesn't feel like I'm giving you the best of me. Because it's not like a lot of people really try to justify it and they try to lower the standard of marriage rather than raise the standard of what humans are capable of, because it's a lot easier to do that, right? And because we do have a difficult relationship with our ideals, right? So, but what we've found to be very productive is just to understand the purpose of a marriage or a marriage blessing is when you have two people who are fully committed to the process of slowly letting go of being an individual and giving the best of themselves, not the rest of themselves, but the best of themselves to each other, then you have this feeling of love. The result is love. Like, you didn't have to, but you did. My God. And again, not that you choose each other once and call it marriage, but that you choose each other every single day. That's love. And that can't happen if your mind is on other people regarding sex. Like, the act of sex, as the way that I describe it in talks, is that when two minds are focused on each other, when two hearts are really focused on serving each other, and when two spirits are working to catapult their bodies towards satisfying each other. The body is just a vessel, and that's what we focus on. That's what we think sex is the body, because we're kind of very animalistic in that respect. Humanity has been that. We've treated sex like we're animals. But in fact, we're very nuanced creatures with a lot of emotions and a lot of complex thoughts and a lot of feelings. Like, we have the potential to do good or to do bad based on our ability to live according to our conscience, right? So when you have two people whose minds are really on each other, I'm thinking about you and your pleasure, and two hearts that are like, I want to do this willingly for you because I love you, and two spirits that are able to like force the body to not be selfish, because that's all it knows. The body just wants to be selfish, right? But in the act of sex, it's like sacrifice. You could call it sacrifice. And then the result is magic, right? But if you have a distracted mind and you're comparing your spouse to somebody else, or there's somebody else living in your head and they're getting in the way of you putting your mind on that person. I mean, I guess most people who are listening to this are adults, right? I don't recommend seeing this movie if you haven't seen it, but there's a movie called The Devil's Advocate with Keanu Reeves and Al Pacino, which is like Al Pacino plays the devil and he's a lawyer, which is hilarious. But at some point, Keanu starts to have give and take with the devil, and he starts getting in his mind, and he's making love to his wife, but his mind is distracted on something else. At a certain point, she's horrified because she says, "Where are you?" And it's still the same two people, but his mind is somewhere else. And she doesn't want to have anything to do with the sexual act because she knows that his mind is not on her. And it feels like a violation. What is that? That's a very uniquely human thing, right? Is that like, you can tell, okay, your body's with me, but your heart isn't, or your mind isn't. I don't like this anymore. It feels wrong, right? So in order to reclaim the act of sex, you have to first reclaim your mind and your heart and your spirit through your body. And when you have two people who've done that, that's where magic happens. Yeah. And it's not an easy thing, but that's what we train people to do in High Noon. And there's a lot in there that you have to unpack and understand and retrain yourself. And that's what we also teach kids too. I know this is, I feel like transition to kids, but this is what we have to train our kids to do, right? Which is to get clear on who they want to be in their minds. What kind of heart do they want? Again, yesterday, that kid called another kid fat. And I was like, oh my God, you're a good kid. You didn't mean that. Let's work on this. Why did you say that? What's going on? And like, not yelling at the kid, but just like where did this come from? Like, what emotion were you feeling when you said that? And like unpacking this. And in terms of sex, when the way that our ardent belief is that you need to talk to your kids about sex without sexualizing it. Because some people think, oh, you teach them, then they're just going to run out and go become addicted to porn or something like that. The opposite is true. My kids know very clearly. I have 3 boys, and the eldest is now 11, but since he was 4, we've been talking very openly about sex in an age-appropriate way, about, hey, just so you know, like, there's people who watch naked people on phones and stuff, and if you ever see that, just come to me and we'll have a talk, okay? And that was like ingrained in his head. If he had any questions, just come to me and we'll talk. I might not have all the answers. We'll figure it out together. and then increasing like the level of his understanding. Like he's seen me give so many talks and all that. So when the word pornography comes up in our houses, he doesn't even bat an eye. It's just like, oh yeah, he's talking about his stuff, right? But we owe it to our kids to let them see that we kiss and hug. And true parents said that, even making love in front of your kids isn't out of the question. Not in a weird way, kinky way, but just in like, what's shameful about this, right? I don't think we're there personally. I can't do that. It's like, I can't focus. Too much weird energy in this room. But definitely, at least, talking to them and helping them unpack what is heavenly sexuality. Why do I love your mom? And why do I kiss her? And why do I want to hold her hand? And my wife definitely squeezes my butt a lot, and in front of them very openly. And we talk about that too. Like it's a loving act. It's like a playful act, and they see it, which is the most important part. But to unpack it is to help them understand it. And so if you help them progressively understand what healthy sexuality is, then they'll be much more aware of what it isn't. And if you keep those channels open, then they'll talk to you when they've seen something that doesn't make sense to them. Why are these kids kissing? They're only 12. Yeah, let's talk about it. I saw this, I was watching, this movie and these people did this weird thing and I saw boobs. Okay, let's talk about it, right? And the more that you have these conversations, the more it just becomes the culture that you have as a family to talk about things. And no matter what comes up, I realized at a certain point, you cannot shelter your kids from everything, no matter how hard you try. In fact, the harder you try, the worse results will be, because at a certain age, when they don't have to listen to you anymore, they're going to run in the opposite direction. So you cannot manipulate them and coddle them up until a certain point. You can try to protect them, within, like, put on filters on their phones, or our kids never look at iPads or anything unless we're together in the living room. That's just a rule that we have. But if you keep the channels open when they are exposed to stuff, and they eventually will be when they get to late teens or whatever, because their friends are going to show it to them or whatever, then they'll know to come to you instead of to try to figure things out for themselves. Because when they come to you, you're always there to listen and to try to understand them, and you help the world make sense to them. And that's not something that you can force. It's a muscle that you have to continually work out as an individual, as a couple, and together with your kids. And it's not always easy, because there's just like a video game. You think you got it, and then, oh my God, this is happening now. Like, wow, we got to unpack this. And then you level up. Just keep doing the same thing. And the point is never to have all the answers. The point is to always be willing to learn together with them, and to have the emphasis be, let's figure it out together. I really care about you enough to listen to you and try to understand where you're coming from, and try to guide you, and to try to love you, and to try to learn together with you. That's really empowering. It's really empowering.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm glad we kind of shifted from dissecting this meaning of sexualization now into, talking about sex with our kids. And you mentioned just being open and talking even from a young age. But I think generally parents just have a fear of, like you said, putting these ideas in kids' heads too early, right? So how can we, not have that fear?
Yeah. You should never be afraid of anything. If you have faith, it means you don't have fear. This is a very confronting statement, but it's true. And that's true of, like, for me, I'm working through the idea of death, to be honest, because my faith has always served me to live in this world. And I have faith to some degree that there's something after, but it still scares the crap out of me, right? So I got to work on that, because it shows the limitations of my faith. The people that have ardent belief in the afterlife are not worried about dying at all. And I've seen this. We've seen examples of this. People they're in a really good place about that. But same with sex, is like, if you're scared of anything to do with sex, it means that you lack faith, and in yourself, maybe in your own ability to convey, conversation about sex. Or maybe you have issues going on in your own marriage where you feel like, I'm not a perfect representation, so who am I to say anything? There's shame. But fear is always an indication that you have stuff to work on yourself in terms of your own relationship with sex. And that's paramount to work on as a parent. Because first of all, I'm not saying that you just go out and just like unpack everything at kids 3 and you're like, well, let me tell you about what porn is. Well, no. But age appropriate, and you should never fear anything, even when it comes up. This is advice that we've heard from several professionals, is how you react when your kid brings something up will dictate whether they ever come back to you with similar information. If you freak out or if you judge them, they will likely never bring you any real information ever again. And they'll always be like, yeah, it's fine, I'm fine. They won't want to talk to you because what you've taught them is that their deepest, darkest secrets are not safe with you. And the only way that you can be a vessel for creating a safe space for your kids is to be in a healthy place yourself. And if it's regarding sex and you have all sorts of fears or misgivings, then you got to work on that stuff. And that means learning how to talk about it with your spouse if you have one. If not, then a therapist or a brother or sister in your community. But I have so much experience and so much belief in conversations are only uncomfortable because they're new and because you have concepts, and every single conversation can eventually become comfortable once you become the owner of it. And that's our mission as a people. Is the family pledge says we're meant to be the owners of Chanoguk. So owners of Chanoguk live like this. That's the family pledge. And the only way that you can become the owner of sexuality in your own life is to wrestle with your demons and become comfortable with it. And when you do that, then your kids can be comfortable with it too. If you're uncomfortable, you cannot make them comfortable. Yeah. So your fear is coming from that place. But, in terms of age appropriateness, there's people like Christian Jensen, people like that who have recommendations. I think it's very personal. It depends on what culture you're in. There's some cultures that are much more protected and less sexualized than others. I'm in the East, and like Vietnam, when I was there, was much more protected in many ways. Here in Mongolia, they seem much more protected in some ways. But if you're anywhere in the West, porn's in schools. A National Center on Sexual Exploitation, they uncover all sorts of stuff. During the pandemic, there's an entire curriculum that was given to an entire board of education. They sent it to their kids. Okay, you guys will be learning online. What they didn't know was what was in there, snuck in there, was a whole lot of porn. So the educational system was giving porn to thousands of kids in their system. And there's so many educational things that have these kind of viruses almost that lead kids right to porn. There's so many avenues that trick little kids to porn. So yeah, it's not really an option to assume that your kids are okay. I think that's the worst plan in the world. The best plan in the world is to form rapport with your child whereby they feel like they can tell you anything. And I know that's what you're going to be building with the boot camp, is like training of helping people to build that rapport with their kids. And that's the safest bet. Because whether it's sex or any other topic, drugs, there's opioid crises, there's all sorts of crazy stuff in this world. Your kids will be able to get through it if they have a safe person to share life with. And last thing that I would say is we've studied addiction for 10 years now. And in the beginning, we heard that the opposite of addiction is connection. Connection is the remedy. And that lack of connection is what drives us to do all sorts of crazy, stupid stuff in this life. So connection is the greatest gift that you can give to your kids. And that means being there for them, listening to them, and trying your best to love them unconditionally. And even if they make mistakes, to still love them. Doesn't mean to accept their mistakes, but to accept them and then to work with them on repairing their mistakes. That's the greatest gift that we can give to them. Other than working on ourselves, that's probably the greatest gift, because it's really hard to help them if you yourself are in a bad place. But
yeah, hallelujah. You said it all. I had two thoughts, which were I think the fear, like you said, there are different fears, right? When talking to your kids about sexuality, especially in an early age, is either because you're in, maybe your own relationships or your own concepts, but also I think another one is just fear of that sexualized society, right? And all the dangers around your children. And I think that was something that I had going in my own
Yeah.
head. And yeah, just saying, oh, what if I talk about this or that? And then, yeah, they'll be, I don't know, um, they'll be in the know, and they know the world is not a wonderful place everywhere. But I think that is actually the exact reason why we have to talk about it.
Yeah.
Yeah, because they need to be prepared and have
So
the
imagine this. There's no contrast unless you give them something to contrast the world against. And you can't just be blind, like open generic ideals of like, okay, that's bad. And then heavenly stuff is perfect stuff. That's, you're setting them up to be miserable if you do that. You need to help them formulate a vision for what they're striving for. That's what all we do in High Noon is like the first thing out of the gate. When somebody comes to us, I'm really struggling. We say, oh, well, I hear you and I feel you and I'm sorry to hear this, but if you didn't have that, what would you want to have? Like if you weren't struggling and wasting all this time and energy on porn, where would you be investing your time? And what does functional relationship look like? And how would you be using your body and your mind? And like we're asking them to start investing their energy in creating the ideal version of themselves, what we call the Chanelguk version of themselves. But it doesn't happen randomly. You have to construct it first in your mind. So in terms of our kids, we have to allow them the opportunity to start constructing a vision for themselves, the future that they want to be. And it's hard for everybody, adults and kids, because we actually are very bad at it. Because we focus most of our energy on all the stuff that we don't like and don't want. And we try to hope for something to fix us. And like the lottery is going to fix all my problems, or some guy is going to fix all my problems. No, like we have to identify what does health look like and strive for that in all aspects of our life that are important to us. And for our kids, if we don't want them to date, okay, why? And what should they be doing instead of that? And like, it's not an easy task. It's not an easy ask, but it actually makes sense if you help them unpack all that you lose from dating. It's actually a giant waste of time and energy, and it sucks your potential as a human being as it's constructed in society, because heartbreak and it takes you away from your authentic self, right? So given a certain context, it's like a terrible proposition, dating. But if you don't contrast that against, like, compared to, don't you want what I have or this person has or whatever, then they're just like, okay, yeah, I'm sure it's going to hurt me down the road, but right now it feels so good to have a crush on this person or to watch porn or whatever. So giving them short-sightedness is a curse. Helping them to formulate a vision for their life that they're willing to fight for, amazing gift, amazing gift. So, and again, progressively, not all at once. And again, School of Love, everything in High Noon is never about a quick fix. It's about a culture. It's about a lifestyle. And so it comes up all the time. We were eating dinner somewhere the other day and we were really talking about sex a lot as a family. And again, I have a 5-year-old, an 8-year-old, and an 11-year-old. And we were talking about it in a way that just was very common and makes sense to everybody. But we were just unpacking it in an appropriate way. And that's the ideal, is not the avoidance of reality. It's having a healthy relationship with reality. And sex is a part of our reality. We're all sexual beings. Whether we are little kids, they have the potential to create new life eventually, right? So why not let them know that? I know one lady, and even what she named her kids, when they were in their house, they would call their sons' genitals like the heavenly palaces or something like that, so that they form a relationship of like, oh yeah, and that makes sense for them, right? For our family, we don't talk like that, but we help them understand, like, that's where God is. My wife was training my son once, like, God's right in there. Like, he's inside there. I obviously helped him unpack that because there's a lot of questions that come with that. But yeah. I think you'll find something that's true to your family, but it only comes with exercising your right as a parent. Talk about difficult things and to feel new and uncomfortable until you stop. But that's how you create something genuine about, yeah, what do you want? Like, what do you want in your family? So that's a good challenge for anybody listening, is like, even in terms of a vision for your family, what kind of conversations would you like to have about sex in your family? And then to start creating the situations for that to happen, whether it's working on yourself or starting working with your kids by talking about other stuff and building up to sex. But it only happens if you're very intentional.
Yeah. So, yeah, another thing that I wanted to bring up is just, um, yeah, this reaction to when kids bring things up, right? Because we are human as parents, and like I don't know, I in some ways I've really learned a lot about how to just deal with situations that would normally upset me in a calm way,
Sure.
and um, and I think that's been really good for my kids. But then sometimes I also think like we have these emotions and they do have a right to come out. um, so just an example, like my son, he had some photos, some family photos, and he very lovingly chopped them up.
Classic.
And then he showed me them. And then I was like, oh my gosh. I mean, this is like this shock, right?
Sure, sure, sure.
That that comes out. But of course, then, you know, it was this initial reaction, and but I saw he was actually showing me with love in his heart, like he meant this in a nice way. So it was, yeah. And then I quickly changed my attitude. I was like, oh, what did you want to do here? Okay. And,
Hmm.
you know, tried to just understand him.
Yeah.
But yeah, just this reaction to what our kids might say, or bring up with us. Like, do you think like there might be shock, right? If they
Sure.
say like, oh, this happened at school, or, you know, a friend of mine was talking about this and showed me that. Do you think we should be swallowing all of that shock and just be like, okay, let's talk? Or should it just, yeah,
I think you should. Yeah, I think you should really try to temper your reaction at first. And you shouldn't keep it in, but I think big emotions for kids are very easily misunderstood, right? If you raise your voice, they think I'm bad,
yeah,
when it could just be that you're stressed out. And so it's really the parents' responsibility to not give kids something that they can't handle. And intense reaction is most likely not their responsibility. It's your responsibility. So as much as you can, first of all, temper your response, and then to unpack it later with somebody who can handle it. But then also to understand. So I got really paranoid about trauma for a bit because I started going down the road of what is trauma. And then there's all these, professionals who are like, oh, how easy it is to traumatize your kids and all this. I was like, oh my God, I don't want to traumatize my kids. And then I became just a little bit paranoid about traumatizing them. And then I realized also you have a window of a grace period as a parent. So long as you address things that arise quickly by talking about it after the emotions have passed, you can actually heal trauma before it turns into trauma. It could just be a difficult event, but that it's healed. And that's when you help the kid release the emotion themselves. Because if you freak out, then they're going to react in their way, and they're freaking out. And now they have this trapped emotion that's associated with you. And in their immaturity, it's like, oh, my mom hates me or whatever. So they have this thing. But if you sit down with them and say, look, I have really overreacted. I'm sorry. And you give them a chance to say how they feel, and then you can hug it out or cry it out, get the emotion out. What happens is you're metabolizing the emotion, both of you, and then it stops being an issue, right? It doesn't accumulate into something bigger than that. So I really feel, and it's crazy that True Father talked about this before psychology caught up. Never let your it's in true, Uncle David and Mitzvah give this heavenly intimacy talk, and Mitzvah always tells this story about father said, don't be, hold a grudge against your spouse for longer than 3 days. Otherwise it kind of metastasizes into resentment. That now seems to be categorically true in the realm of trauma. Is like, if you have a really strong reaction, stop at a certain point and address it with your kids. And that's where it's going to take humility on your side to be like, look, I'm still learning how to be a parent too. I'm not perfect, and I'm sorry. I would really like to get better. Then you can restore any damage done, right? But you got to catch it, and you got to talk about it.
Yeah, I feel like you answered this question already. I was going to ask you if my kid doesn't bring up sex, anything about sex, should I bring it up? But I feel like you answered.
Yes.
Yeah.
Like I just would love to bring up an analogy that like if your kid never brings up, what is health food, don't you want to teach them what is healthy eating and healthy, how much to exercise? Like they're most likely not going to just be like, oh, mom, I did, 25 sit-ups randomly today. Because they don't even understand like the merit of living a healthy lifestyle until you go out of your way to be like, this is why sometimes you eat food that doesn't taste like pizza because your body doesn't like it. My kids, we've really gone on this health journey and we've unpacked every step of the way. It's like, this is why I believe we should stop eating cereals. We kick cereals out of our life. This is why I have different feelings than your mother about bread. And like, you know, and even that, we don't have the same exact, view on certain stuff, but we unpack it so that they can have a holistic view and eventually so that they can make their own decision when they grow up. This is much more likely to happen if you're not just either putting blinders on them or coddling them, right? So, in terms of sex, like, there's nothing inherently bad about sex, only our relationship with it, only our dysfunctional relationship with it. So, to protect them from it is like protecting them from some form of joy, which is just a weird thing to do from your kids. So there's nothing inherently wrong or weird or strange or bad about sex other than how humanity's treated it over these years. And our movement, to be honest, has really only emphasizes that, is like all the bad stuff. And so kids grow up thinking that sex is this terrible, scary thing. And then they're asked to go get blessed and have sex, which has created so many weird, dysfunctional relationships because people have all this fear about sex. But again, to talk to your kids, we talk to them all the time about one day when they're married, how great it's going to be for them to have somebody to hold and stuff like that. And we can't wait for that. And working with them every step of the way. And it's never based on our interpretation of our faith, but it's a conversation of helping them to understand the world around them and giving them, I'm always humble enough to say, like, this is what I understand to be true. And then saying, well, what do you believe? And hearing their opinions too. Because just because you say something's true doesn't mean that they give a crap, right? Especially if you don't have that rapport yet. So a lot of times I'm like, do I make sense? Do you have opposing views? And let's talk about those too, because those are warranted. Let's unpack it all. And so to neglect a conversation about sex is a very I feel like it's a form of nihilism, short-sighted nihilism, because you're cutting them off from a very important of like, how do they even come into this world? Wouldn't it be nice to know that, I came out of a place of love. I loved your mom so much, your mom loved me so much that we allowed this to happen. And God created this beautiful way of us celebrating and getting a kid. What, for them to hear that story. Like, why would you not tell that? So again, this is not just my opinion. This is in our faith, if people struggle with our faith, then that's on them. And I'm just talking about where I'm at. But to be honest, True Mother doesn't talk a whole lot about sex. And I believe it's because she's conservative. She's a woman. She was raised in a very conservative way. And so I get that. No judgment whatsoever. But it's left us to kind of really largely rely on True Father's words about sex. And, he was very expressive and very clear, especially in how important it is to become the owner of sex and to lift it up to this holy place. If you want your kids to believe in God, you don't avoid a conversation about God and you don't just talk about Satan all day. You teach them why you believe in God and what your relationship of God has brought you. And if you're an honest person, you also talk about your struggles with your faith in God and some of the difficulties. And it helps them to understand you and God a little bit more. They're looking for that. Same thing is true of sex, right?
Yeah, I'm loving your analogies. Can I use them sometimes?
Please, yeah, they're I have like anybody else on the honeymoon staff knows I have my days. Someday I tried to use analogies at the Blue Dragon tour, and at one point I was just midway through an analogy, and I was like, "Is it okay if I just stop this? Because I'm not going anywhere with this. I'm sorry." And I just moved on. So yeah, if it's useful, take it.
Yeah, I mean, just the health food because kids, yeah, they don't really know naturally what's healthy for them and not.
No,
And so they don't really bring it up. I mean, okay, they learn in school.
sure.
And then sometimes they'll be telling us parents, we don't want to eat that anymore. Or it might be more because of environment reasons. But yeah,
Yeah,
it's
yeah.
just
Well,
really
I
up
think
to us parents.
absolutely. And you know, it's just you're really handicapping them from not giving them the benefit of trust of talking about life and the nuances of life. If you make sweeping generalities, you're not really helping them. And if you're just assuming that they're going to figure out life for themselves, then you're really hurting their potential.
Right. So let's talk about it. I think we
Yeah.
can, yeah, everyone talk about it. That's
It can be
so
fun too.
good.
It can really be fun. Like, again, for a lot of parents, the fear is very real, and it's not bad. It's just because it's so new and you love your kids so much, you don't want to screw them up. And I get that. But when you just start to inculcate it within your family, you just start to adopt the tradition of talking about it in ways that make sense to your family. And it becomes a part of who you are, right? There's certain things that you naturally talk about at the dinner table or in a car, and there's certain things that you don't talk about. That's just your family's culture. I think it's so adaptable for your family, but it's everything new is a little bit awkward and clunky in the beginning. And eventually it stops being so, and it starts to become a little bit fun and a little bit less cumbersome. The more you do it, the more fun it becomes and the less cumbersome it becomes. And I swear to you, it can become a joyful conversation that's just fun and usually lighthearted, but also sometimes heavy. There's certain movies that my kids are not allowed to watch because I don't believe the content. And so we talk about it. I don't just ban them, but I say, this is why I'm not letting you watch this movie. It's because there's this content, and here's why I don't believe in that. I never want them, if your kids just agree because you force them to, then again, that's going to have a shelf life. And eventually when they become old enough, they will form their own opinions, and they'll likely be a rejection of yours. You know, to help them understand the world is such a great gift.
That's true. Yeah, I've
Yeah.
been talking to my kids more about sexuality and I've been saying that it's a wonderful, amazing thing. And then I was so happy when my one of my kids came to me and said, yeah, I think it's weird. And I was like, yeah, that's also great. Like, thanks for telling me. And that's fine if you think it's weird. That's totally normal. And I was just happy to have that short give and take about it
Yeah.
and that she was honest.
Yeah. Yeah, we do crazy things for love as humans, honestly. We'll do all sorts of things. And if it's not like a real, genuine, true love, we'll take the closest thing that we can find, right? So I genuinely, like, I've really surveyed this in terms of our movement and a lot of people's, because I know people from different faiths. There's so many people that stray away. They take a sabbatical from their faith or from their belief system. But the ones who come back often come back because that's what feels like home to them, right? So the idea of family is you want to create a home, not just a physical brick and mortar home, but a sense of belonging. And so that means to show your kids that you're really there for them during the good times and the bad, and that they can talk about anything with you. And even if they go through a spell where they very much disagree with you or reject your ideas, eventually there'll be such a longing that they can't get anywhere else because you've sowed those seeds. You are their parents. And I know I've challenged you to watch this movie, and you probably haven't yet, but Interstellar actually talks about this phenomenon that everything is transmuted through basically the parent-child relationship. And it's like the loving, unconditional love between a parent and the child that makes everything happen in this entire cosmos. That's the purpose of the cosmos, right? And but the kids have to know that it's true. And that's what drove the character in the movie to do all sorts of amazing things. Was she just, her dad said that he would come home, and that drove her to do incredible things. And so if we let our kids know that no matter what, we love them, then I really believe that in the end they'll always come back, because there's nothing else that can compare to that. Is not just the words, but the feeling of belonging. That, yeah, I have friends, I have all sorts of things, right? I know rich people, I know famous people, right? And I know that all of them act really stupidly if they don't have a solid relationship with their parents. I just found out one of these guys that I used to do comedy with, he became really famous, and he did all sorts of weird stuff in his marriage. And I found out he just had to pay $2.6 million in his divorce settlement. And, it's just messy, right? And I just know that I would have been the exact same position, maybe not as successful, I don't know. But if I didn't find true parents and like find this tradition of belonging first in love, then yes, you'll still make mistakes, but you'll always want to come back, right? And so talking about difficult things with our kids is giving them permission to be a real person with their own fears and their own questions. And if we ignore a part of them because of our own fears, we're actually limiting how much they are able to be themselves in front of us. And guess what? That part of them will find another place, another forum to act out and to figure out what is true or false. And if it's not coming from you, the likelihood that it will be beneficial to them is very small. Google doesn't care about your kids. Their best friends don't care about your kids as much as you probably do. So, yeah.
Yeah, it sounds exciting. I mean, to really give that to your kids. I feel like these days coaching is in such a boom right now. It's so popular to get coaching for every little thing, for your fitness, for your eating habits, or maybe your meditation, so many things. And that's maybe because this parental loving position has been really missing in so many people's lives. And so they really crave it, like just that loving support. I mean, that's what a coach does. It's like, okay, you didn't manage, that's okay. We can do it again next time. Or just tell me about how you're doing. And they're there to just accept you and keep lifting you up. And I just remember also a few friends of mine, they shared about their time in university. And it was often just a terrible time. Like they go through so much stress and then partly depression, and they don't go to their parents because probably past misunderstandings, or just they didn't get to build up that acceptance and love of, yeah, look at me now, I'm depressed, do you still love me? And then being able to be accepted in that way. So for me, it's exciting because I want to be there for my kids also, like in those situations. So I'm excited to build up that foundation, and I hope I do it right.
Yeah, if you try as sincerely as possible, you're doing it right. And a sincere person wants to get better, so you'll learn on the job and you'll get better with time. That's what interest and that's what love does, is like it perpetuates you forward. So it's not something that's unattainable for anybody, regardless of where you think you're at with your kids. If you feel like you're way behind, your kids just want to know at the end of the day that you love them, right? And yeah, it's just an investment, but it's the greatest investment that you could possibly make. To be honest, more than anything else, is like the inheritance. If you think about inheritance, I know so many people that are starting all these different financial strategies so that their kids can inherit like $1 million in a trust fund by a certain time. And that's where they're putting all their energy. And I think like, okay, that's fine having money. I don't really know. But for sure, if I could give them the feeling of loving themselves because I love them enough so that they could love themselves, they'll do far greater in this world than people with money and without that love, right? You could have both, but for sure, my focus is making as many opportunities as possible for them to know that I love all of them. Yeah. And that means talking about the difficult parts, too. And so sex is probably one of the scariest topics for some reason, because honestly, a lot of us don't have ourselves worked out. And so we fear that they're going to judge us.
Yeah. But yeah, like you said, it's just uncomfortable because you're not in the habit. But once we break the ice, then it doesn't freeze anymore, hopefully. We keep it up. Thanks so much for sharing so much with everyone. I think a lot of people, even myself, can learn from what you said. So yeah, thanks for being here.
My pleasure. Thank you.